Good morning, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining us today at this session on forestry and farming and business resilience. Thank you very much all for joining us and in these slightly strange circumstances this year. My name is Virginia Harden-Scott. I am the Woodland Creation Officer for Central Scotland Conservancy for Scottish Forestry. My job is to promote and support the increase of new woodland cover within the Central Scotland area. Within this, I primarily aim to help landowners understand the potential opportunities associated with the integration of forestry into rural businesses and to highlight the related grant funding opportunities associated with that. And the integration of forestry with agriculture to increase business resilience is going to be the focus for today's seminar, very much in mind, coming from a farming family as I do, that both agriculture and forestry have a key role to play in delivering the resources required for our society now and for the future. So for today's session, we will be focused upon the practicalities of opportunities associated with woodland creation, which will hopefully assist you as landowners and managers in making informed decisions on whether woodland creation would be appropriate for your business or not. We will not be focusing today upon the wider area policy related to agriculture or forestry. In terms of today, joining me today is David Robertson from Scottish Woodlands, Head of Director of Scottish Woodlands. Thank you very much, David, and he will follow me in his presentation. Please do keep any questions until the end if you can. We have 45 minutes for presentations and a video, and then we have time for questions afterwards. So we can take questions then. I'm very aware that we have chat functions down the side of our screen. Can I multitask to answer chat functions at the same time as present? Probably not, so I'll try and keep it simple. So just in terms of what I'm going to cover today, I'm going to just look at quickly at the context of Scottish Government support for forestry, the Forestry Grant scheme, look at drivers for the integration of forestry within existing rural businesses, look at livestock and crop benefits associated with woodlands, the wider benefits associated with woodland, and then we'll look at a farm woodland creation case study video of Gascoigne Farms, a subject of which is Peter Gascoigne, a video we produced last year. And I'll then hand over to David, who will talk to you about natural capital and business resilience. So in terms of the background to Scottish Government support for forestry, through the Climate Change Act 2019, Scotland is committed to reaching net zero by 2045. There are also further interim targets laid out in the legislation with greenhouse gas emissions reductions of at least 54% by 2023, 75% by 2030 and 90% by 2040. And related to these, we have woodland creation targets of 15,000 hectares currently of new woodland creation per annum, rising to 18,000 hectares per annum of woodland creation by 2025. And it is the Scottish Government's ambition for forestry that by 2050, Scotland's woodland cover will increase from around 20% currently to 30% of the Scottish land area. And they hope that these new woodlands will absorb greenhouse gas emissions and help mitigate flood risk and improve water quality, as well as making an important contribution to improving biodiversity and also to people's health and welfare. And as this sustainable woodland resource increases and produces more wood fibre, a greater amount of wood products will be used in construction, consequently storing more sequestered carbon in buildings. So in terms of support, the Forestry Grant scheme, which is part of the Scottish Rural Development Programme, offers attractive funding opportunities to help farmers and land managers and owners to plant new woodlands. The Forestry Grant scheme offers a range of capital payments for planting woodland of different types and also offers subsequent maintenance payments. So currently in Scotland, landowners can receive grants of up to £6,210 per hectare towards the cost of new woodland planting, with monies for fencing and tree protection and other capital items available in addition to this. So the rate table on this slide just highlights the payments. This includes planting and maintenance payments. It does not include any of the capital items such as fencing. Bear in mind the cost of delivery, given that the grant rates reduce for schemes 300 hectares or over. So the Forestry Grant scheme is a competitive scheme and it's open to applications all year round, providing flexibility and helping farmers avoid any requirement to complete an application during busy periods. Importantly, land planted under the Forestry Grant Scheme remains eligible for the basic payment scheme. So as I mentioned, additional money is available for capital items, which are not included in initial planting rates. And these are outlined on the table in this slide here, including fencing, tree shelters, deer gates, etc. In terms of timescales, a straightforward application may take 3 to 4 months to process, and that's from commencement of the detailed survey and design to the production of an approved contract. A complicated scheme may take slightly longer, involving, for example, specialist surveys, and that may take from 4 to 6 months as a standard. Applications are required to state what financial year the works will be completed in, and it is possible to split fencing and planting works across separate years, which should assist with project cash flow. In terms of payment, the capital grants are paid on completion of the works, and maintenance payments are paid annually thereafter for the following 5 years. In order to maximise your chances of a successful application, pre-application consultation with your local woodland officer for Scottish Forestry is absolutely key. And in order to avoid any delays in turnaround time, all the information required of you should be provided at the outset. Also, bear in mind, establishment costs should not exceed more than £6,000 per hectare. You can find full information on all the eligibility and scoring criteria for the scheme on the Rural Payments website, and I'll give you a link to that at the end of this presentation. So in terms of the particular uplifts in Scotland, in our area, which is the central Scotland area, there is an additional uplift to the national grants at the Central Scotland Green Network contribution. This offers a very valuable and attractive top-up to the national planting rates in the CSGN area, and the map is here on the slide. And the contribution exists in recognition of differential land ownership patterns in the Central Scotland area compared to the rest of Scotland in terms of having smaller holdings, and where accessing land for large areas of woodland planting is more challenging. So in terms of
Virginia, sorry, could I just step in, Virginia? I'm not sure if anybody else having the same problem, but the presentation is actually very pixelated now for some reason. I just wonder.
Right. Okay.
You need to share it full screen, perhaps.
Let me do that. Is that better?
Yes, it is. It is a bit clearer. It's not fully readable at this end, but it is certainly a bit clearer. So full screen.
I think that's as best as I can do.
It's certainly clearer, but I think we'd obviously make these presentations available to anybody that wishes.
Yes, they certainly will.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, David, and apologies for that. I don't think there's anything I can do about this at the moment.
Okay.
But yes, the slides will be available afterwards. So in terms of the Central Scotland Green Network contribution, it's paid at £2,500 per hectare in the core area, which is the dark red area in the middle of the map, £1,500 per hectare in the outer core area, and £750 per hectare in the fringe area, which is the very lightest edge of the Central Scotland Green Network map. These payments can help generate surpluses on woodland creation schemes, depending on the individual scheme costs. In terms of eligibility areas, in the outer core area, up to 65 hectares per application will be eligible for the uplift, while in the core and the fringe area, the limit will be up to 40 hectares per application. So the table in the slide, and I'm sorry again if people cannot see this clearly, that shows initial planting rates and maintenance payments available in the CSGN area. Doesn't include monies for capital payments, which are paid obviously in addition to that. Figures in the table are based upon target area payments, which are identified as either preferred or potential in the local woodland and forestry strategy. Other regional uplifts are also available elsewhere in Scotland, for example in the Cairngorms and Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Parks and the Highland Native Woodland area, and information on those is accessible through the link at the end of this presentation. The Forestry Grant Scheme provides funding also under the Sheep and Trees Initiative. This enables applications for both woodland creation and forest infrastructures, including roads. It's available to upland livestock farmers where sheep are a major component and who will continue to farm. The new woodland must be between 10 and 50 hectares of productive conifer, and land, just a note, is that landowners cannot apply for sheep and trees as well as a CSGN contribution. In terms of budget availability, between October 2015 to the 1st of October 2020, over £201 million worth of funding was approved for 1,887 woodland creation cases in Scotland, covering 47,136 hectares of new planting. The budget for 2020-2021 is £56.3 million, and that will grow in 2021 in line with woodland creation target increases. There is strong Scottish Government commitment to continue funding forestry beyond 2020, and an additional £160 million was announced for forestry and agriculture in the programme for government, and that includes £100 million for Scottish forestry planting grants over the next 5 years. So what are the drivers for integrating forestry into existing rural businesses? It's still sometimes thought that forestry has to be at the expense of farming and farming output, and all too often forestry can be seen as competing for prime arable land. However, there are significant opportunities for integrating forestry into existing farm businesses to increase business resilience. So 40 years ago, we spent approximately 50% of our income on food in Britain. Today, we spend just 8% of our income on food, with margins being continually squeezed, requiring ever-increasing levels of business sustainability. And all this is now placed against the background of uncertainty over Brexit and the future of agricultural subsidies, with the likelihood in the future that landowners will receive greater payments for the provision of environmental services. So this means that business as usual is unlikely to be an option for farmers in the future. In such an environment, landowners and managers are increasingly looking for ways to maximise productivity of their land and to find alternative additional income streams. And integrating forestry with farming offers valuable opportunities to do just that. A recent report, the interim report by the independent inquiry Farming for 1.5 degrees Celsius, has stated that Scotland cannot achieve its net zero targets without widespread commitment by the agricultural community, not only to cut the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, but also to take action to reabsorb them as well. The report outlined the unique role Scottish agriculture has to play in meeting the climate change targets and of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Recommendations for the report include a move towards multifunctional land use, and this includes agroforestry. In conclusion, the report finds that agroforestry remains one of the most effective ways to achieve Scotland's climate goals across a range of soil types, while improving agricultural and biodiversity resilience and providing a diversity of products. So trees very much can help achieve net zero at the same time as maintaining agricultural productivity. In the picture on the slide, which I hope you can see, Ardagh and Threapland farms, underproductive or difficult to manage areas have been planted with trees by the owner Ian MacDonald, with no adverse effect on overall agricultural productivity. And in fact, the schemes are assisting with stock management, disease control, and the supply of low-cost wood fuel, and also with a desire to move to outdoor lambing in future years, whilst providing an additional future revenue stream for the farm. Ian MacDonald, the farmer, states that without question the planting of woodland has been a big success and has benefited the overall running of our sheep enterprise. So after his initial planting on the farm, Ian MacDonald applied at the end of 2017, or was granted at 2017, a further Woodland Creation grant under the Forestry Grants scheme for a larger commercial plantation of 37.5 hectares. The site for the planting was picked because it was very little bit was good grazing land. It was described basically as a disaster, mainly rushes, with very little, with McDonald's having spent over £15,000 over 15 years spraying, lagging, sliming and topping it for basically no return. Instead, the land is now holding an asset for the future. In terms of livestock benefits produced by woodland, particularly from shelter benefits, the Farming for 1.5 degrees report states that there is potential across all Scottish farms for significant improvements in animal health, and that better animal health can support both reproductive and production performance and help optimise population outputs. It's estimated that up to 20% of agricultural productivity is lost via lameness, mastitis and other avoidable illnesses. and shelter benefits associated with woodlands can help to reduce this figure. A shelter belt or woodland block and associated fencing along the boundary provides a physical barrier between neighbouring landholdings and within landholdings, and this can significantly reduce the transfer of disease between flocks by nose-to-nose contact. And trees can also potentially act as a filter for airborne diseases, although more research is needed on that front. Woodlands can act as natural lambing sheds and can result in an associated increase in postnatal survival rates in lambs by up to 30%. Shelter delivered by Woodland Creation can also help with improved feed conversion rates and livestock productivity. So livestock will, as I'm sure many of you know, use up to 50% of their energy keeping warm and dry. So the warmer they are in winter, the less energy they will use on keeping warm rather than growing. Andrew Barber, who's featured in this slide of Mains of Bunskeed Estate, states that the farmer who invests in trees can get the ground to work in a more efficient fashion. And he goes on to say that in a changing climate, improving shelter for the livestock enterprise makes long-term financial sense. Creating new pastoral woodland, which in time is grazed by the stock, is one way to have your cake and eat it. The trees can provide a fuel wood source in areas where this demand exists, and while it is growing, the woodlands can improve the performance of livestock. And Mr. Barber has managed to change from keeping the more valuable Beltex sheep as opposed to blackface sheep in the fields which are benefiting from shelter belts planted 30 years ago. In terms of crop benefits associated with woodland creation, approximately 2.9 million tonnes of topsoil are eroded every year in the UK, reducing the long-term fertility of the soil. However, infiltration of surface water by trees can help reduce the erosion of topsoils from adjacent trees. Grass production in fields adjacent to woodland in early spring is increased by warmer air and or soil temperature. And this allows the movement of stock to uplands sooner, meaning less feed is required and hay and silage fields can be vacated earlier. Related shelter can also help prevent crop lodging caused by wind and subsequent harvesting losses. Woodland can help increase crop yields in adjacent fields. Related shelter has been shown to increase yields of crops compared to unsheltered crops through reduction in water loss, particularly in dry years. And it's been shown that shelter belts can increase wheat yields by at least 3.5% as a result of more efficient use. The current system of upland grazing farming demands a lambing percentage in excess of 120%, much larger hefts per shepherd, and a seriously effective utilisation of in-by pastures with a minimum of voting feed. Increased nutrition can be achieved through accessible quality grazing by encouraging the better bent fescue grasses through removal of larger biomass competitors. The better, lower and more accessible areas of the hill can be managed to this end. So with careful design, forest blocks of fencing funded as part of the Forestry Grant scheme can provide these grazing paddocks. According to a report by Welsh Woodlands and Timber, areas protected by woodlands show 20% increase in average annual pasture growth. In terms of wider benefits associated with woodland creation, it's estimated that the monetary value of insect pollination in the UK is more than £510 million per annum. The trees, habitats and plants associated with shelter belts, hedges and woodlands provide important overwintering refuges, nesting sites and feeding sources to help sustain pollinator populations throughout the year. These potential natural benefits are set against the background of increasing restrictions in the use of agricultural chemicals. And research also shows that increasing elements of non-crop habitat reduces overall pest risk. Low carbon wood fuel is also a benefit of woodland creation and forestry, and drives to incentivise the use of low carbon wood fuel in the UK have led to a strong market for wood fuel products. So first thinnings from your woodland, lower value timber and smaller roundwood, previously unsuitable for other markets and perhaps previously with no value, can provide a valuable source of sustainable low carbon and low cost wood fuel. And this provides incentives to manage existing farm woodlands, increasing overall timber quality within them, and also to plant new woodlands. In terms of sporting benefits, well-sited woodland can also increase the potential of game shooting on farms and estates, particularly in the case of pheasants, with the woodlands providing shelter and a valuable source of food. And finally, diffuse pollution and natural flood benefits. There are a number of ways in which woodlands can be incorporated into farming systems to mitigate pollutants and to safeguard water resources, whilst also helping to support agriculture production. Woodland buffers on mid-slope and downfield edges can be effective in increasing water infiltration, reducing soil and water movement, slowing runoff, and intercepting nutrient and sediment, slowing the flow of transported sediments, thereby reducing sediment in watercourses. So by trapping pollutants to bind to soil particles, trees can help reduce water pollution, acting as nutrient sinks. And in one particular study in Pont Bren in mid-Wales, it was found that water infiltration increased by 60% within 5 metres of tree shelter belts after just 3 years of planting. And just a quick note on realising the potential from your woodlands. It's sometimes easy to get hung up on maximising grant income at the outset, and this could come at the expense of long-term profitability of your woodlands. So you should plan for the long term to realise potential. You should consider management requirements at the outset and budget for the long term and not the short. Okay, and so just finally, Scottish Forestry has today published a new walkthrough guide to creating new woodlands as part of the national drive to boost tree planting. The step-by-step guide aimed at small landowners breaks down the process of preparing a woodland creation application into easy and bite-sized chunks. It helps to assess if the land is suitable for tree planting through to preparing and submitting an application for the Forestry Grant scheme. So the new Preparing Woodland Creation Applications Guide is also accompanied by a simplified small woodlands operational plan, and that can be used to support all grant applications up to 5 hectares in size. The guide is basically designed to enable land managers to submit applications themselves where possible, or else to limit financial expenditure on consultancy. Secondly, the Farm Advisory Service is currently offering Scottish farmers and crofters up to £1,000 worth of funding to help enlist the help of a specialist advisor to help with woodland creation. And the advisor will work with the land manager or the landowner to review farm-specific opportunities and financial incentives available to create or manage woodlands. So the contact details of the Farm Advisory Service appear on this slide. As David has already kindly mentioned, the slides will be available after the presentation. And just in case technology doesn't work, my email address is at the end of this presentation. Please do email me directly if you cannot access the slides but wish to do so. And just finally, a limited number of free feasibility studies are being offered currently by Scottish Forestry in the Grampian region, although this excludes the Cairngorms National Park. And this is to help owners assess whether forestry is the right option for them or not. As well as detailing available options, the Farm Woodland Assessment Scheme will explore predicted expenditure and also cash flow throughout the grant scheme and up until the woodland is established. And it will also advise on future management. If you have any interest in this scheme, please do contact Tim Gordon-Roberts of Grampian Conservancy for further information, and his contact details featured in this slide. So, just in conclusion, there are significant opportunities for integrating forestry into rural businesses to maximise business productivity and sustainability and increase business resilience through economic opportunities, the production of an additional timber crop and additional revenue stream, through opportunities for increasing crop yields in fields adjacent to woodland, through animal health benefits and related increases in productivity from shelter provision associated with woodlands, through biodiversity and sporting benefits, through the production of a source of low carbon wood fuel, and through natural flood management and diffuse pollution control benefits. And all this set against a background of uncertainty over future subsidies and possible moves towards the provision of public goods, with related uncertainty of the viability of some farming models in the future. And all of this is a time when demand for timber is increasing and the market is strong. And that brings us to a convenient point to hand over to David Robertson, Director of Investment and Business Development of Scottish Woodlands, who's going to talk to us about woodland and natural capital diversification. Thank you very much, David. I will just hand over to you.
Virginia, thank you very much. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I'm just going to set up my slideshow here as well and put that in. It's good to see that we've got over 80 souls sheltering from what is pretty foul weather looking out the window in Inverness this morning, certainly. So glad to see that you're here to join us today. I am going to cover woodland and natural capital diversification, and I'm going to concentrate, as one might imagine, quite heavily on the forestry aspect of that, somewhat unashamedly. What we're going to look at is the drivers for forestry as we see going forward, where government support for forestry sits at the current time and where we expect it's going forwards, and benefits for farmers and landowners in looking at forestry and natural capital aspects on their properties. So to look at drivers, really when we move on to drivers, I think the important thing to understand is that we need timber security in the UK now pretty much the same way as we did when the Forestry Commission was established in 1919. We're currently the world's second largest net importer of forest products behind China, with a trade deficit of £8.2 billion per annum in timber use. Global timber demand, according to the World Bank, is set to quadruple by 2050, and in the same time, global population is set to exceed 10 billion people. Those two factors alone demonstrate that there's going to be a huge additional requirement, a huge additional demand on our natural resources going forward. When we look at carbon net zero and the push for net zero in the UK in England by 2050 and in Scotland by 2045, and other external factors like the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, which really is driving a network of connections through from China, through Asia, Southern Asia into Europe. All of these aspects have considerable potential to impact our typical supply chains that we have from Northern Europe. So we have to take these into account. When we look at timber use in the chart in the top right here, when we look at timber use per cubic metre per 1,000 head of population, in the UK, we use 147 cubic metres of timber per 1,000 head. In the US, that's 275. In the emerging nations, including China, Southeast Asia, South America, it's 25 cubic metres. So it doesn't take a lot of consideration to think that there's extreme pressure coming on global resources, and we have to do something here in our own country to protect certainly our timber resources going forward. Another aspect to consider is the historical planting achieved in the UK, and if we look at this chart very quickly, 1988 was when Schedule D tax was stopped in the Lawson budget, and immediately following that there was a really quick fall off of planting in the UK. So we went from around about 30,000 hectares per year to just over 5,000 hectares a year in 2010. Last year, we managed to increase that to 13,400 hectares, and the vast majority of that was in Scotland, as demonstrated in the table on the top right. 11,200 hectares out of the 13,400 hectares were planted in Scotland. When we look at what this means, forecasting forward this cessation of planting, the stopping of planting or slowing down of commercial planting in the late 80s, and forecast that forward a rotation of a crop, which is roughly 40 to 50 years on average, then we start to come into a period of significant undersupply. And the yellow pool here, which is shown in the centre of the screen, really represents the undersupply to meet the current sawmilling capacity that's coming forward. So not only do we have increased demand, we also have a reduction in supply, which, as far as we are concerned, is a significant driver for value going forward. Anything that's planted now falls into this undersupply period, and therefore, theoretically, should certainly have a higher value. Additional aspects to consider in that are UK targets for house planting. It's not quite that easy, house building. In 2019, across the UK, we completed just over 200,000 houses. The UK government has an intention and a goal of constructing 300,000 houses by 2025 per annum. Now, when we look at the external factors, COVID-19, the recession created by that, it's unlikely that we're going to reach that 300,000 target. But even if we get quarter of the way there, there's still a significant additional potential for timber demand in the UK to meet that. And a lot of these houses will be built with wood. In Scotland, top of the chart here in the blue line, around about 78% of houses are built with timber frames at the current time, 2019. In England, however, that's 22%. So across the UK, around about 26. If we looked at this chart in 2016, the English figure was 16%. So we're seeing a significant increase of timber frame houses and residential construction in England. And England is, in the UK, the largest market for house building. So, that's mainly fueled by off-site construction, which gives speed, accuracy and efficiency into the construction process. And again, for us, another significant driver for timber use in the UK. And when that's taken into account, the CO2 equivalent of competitive building materials to timber or alternative building materials to timber, timber stands out extremely well. All of the other main construction materials that are used are net emitters of carbon in their manufacturing process. But timber is currently the only commercially available material available at scale which can lock up timber in the construction process. So another very good sales point in that regard. Carbon is extremely important and becoming even more important. Just over a year ago, the UK became the first major economy in the world to pass laws to end its contribution to climate change by 2050. And the Committee for Climate Change report, Net Zero, the UK's contribution to stopping global warming, was launched in May 2019 and outlines the route map to achieve net zero in England by 2050 and in Scotland by 2045. Forestry played a major part in the sequestration processes outlined in that report, and which identified an annual sequestration of some 22 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent at 2050 as a base expectation. To put that into figures, at the higher, further ambition end of the report, it suggested a level of approximately 30,000 hectares per annum of planting by 2025 across the UK would be required to meet the targets set. This is a huge challenge, obviously, not least with competition for agricultural land. But on that matter, the report outlined a significant trend in reduction of grassland area, with a predicted repurposing of over 3 million hectares due to changes in grazing intensity and a drive towards healthier diets. So this may make room for land use change at the scale required, but is obviously very much a controversial subject between land use, between agriculture and forestry. Charismatic carbon, another significant driver for establishment in the UK, certainly in Scotland. Environmental, social and corporate governance benefits of organisations. This screen that's shown here is the first Google search returned when searching for ESG forestry in Scotland. And it turns up a global fintech organisation who have invested in a carbon project in Scotland. So a significant number of corporate entities are jumping to sell the story of carbon sequestration as part of their ESG targets. And whether their contribution is large or small, the figures sound good to investors and other stakeholders. So this is a good time to look at natural capital. Virginia's touched on it in her presentation earlier on, but I think just to give a little bit more detail. The report from the independent inquiry Farming for 1.5 Degrees recognised that farming uniquely has the opportunity not just to improve its own performance by reducing emissions from agricultural activity, but to impact positively on wider societal emissions through good soil and land management, by locking up carbon in trees and soil and by supporting ecosystems. So the list on the screen here is not exhaustive. Flood alleviation, woodland planting can assist in slowing down water, especially in floodplains and water margins. Water quality, reduction of runoff from agricultural and forestry land, including fertilisers and pesticides, animal waste and effluent are all important aspects to improving water quality for those downstream. Peatland restoration, hugely important to look at the restoration of open peatland and modified peatland to reduce carbon losses from those areas, from the quantities of carbon that are already stored up in that peatland, and restore these natural sponges in effect, which can also assist in flood alleviation through water retention. And this can be carried out, peatland restoration can be carried out through drainage, stock and wild animal management, and protection of the surface vegetation and revegetation of these areas. Waste reduction, and whether that's through reduction of plastics or whether it's through precision farming to reduce fertiliser and pesticide use, a common goal for all really, and it has benefits for the wider society. Biodiversity protection, all of the above presents opportunities really to increase the biodiversity on farms, and I think that's going to be a much wider expectation of society going forward. So government support. I must say there's a lack of clarity for future grant support across all sectors, but there's no doubt that support now going forward will be tied to the supply of public benefit. Fergus Ewing, the Cabinet Secretary with responsibility for rural economy and tourism, has been extremely supportive for the agricultural and forestry sectors in Scotland. And when we have an annual target of some 36 million trees across the UK by 2030, a substantial proportion of that being established in Scotland, we have to consider that there must be future government support in place to do that. Forestry received a combined 52 million in direct grants in 2019-20, and Virginia outlined in her presentation that that's increased to 56.3 for this coming year. So where's this taking us? The graph here shows forestry planting from 2010 to the current day, which is represented by the red line. Then onward on to 2025, showing the Scottish Government's increased aspirational targets. The aspirational target at 2025 has recently increased from 15,000 hectares to 18,000 hectares per annum. And the Scottish Government's climate change plan sets targets to restore 50,000 hectares of degraded peatland by 2020, increasing to 250,000 hectares of degraded peatland by 2030. So a huge increase in both woodland establishment and peatland restoration targets across the board. And financial support for that seems very likely, especially when you take into account that 1 tonne of carbon sequestered by wood or peat costs approximately £7, whereas 1 tonne sequestered using mechanical carbon capture techniques costs upwards of £260 per tonne. So benefits for farm units. Rationalisation of the farm unit. Forestry and natural capital projects represent an opportunity for farmers to consider the setup of their unit. And many stock farmers, when they look at their holding and sit objectively and assess it, will identify areas that consistently cause them problems. That could be through stock management, neighbouring land use, steep gullies that stock always gravitate to when they're either giving birth or sick, and awkward shaped fields that can be alleviated by sensible planting. Stock health, Virginia talked about liver fluke reduction, removing wet areas, and shelter increasing the survival rates and reducing the feed cost rates for young stock. Financial, reducing areas of large inputs, as Virginia talked about, where you're using lime and slag to improve low quality site, turning these into areas of high output, planting forestry on it, which is both high value and high potential future income and high capital value. So I think it's important to look at where we are and how we get to the point that we need to. Agriculture and forestry have clashed in the past. There's absolutely no doubt of that. And I think there's a perception of the forestry industry being favoured by politicians over farming. But this image is not really what foresters see. And I think we understand that there is a huge cultural and historical background to get past, where much of the land that is currently farmed, certainly upland stock farms, has been extremely hard won and converted over centuries into the current land use. And people have extremely strong connections with that land. So we need to be very, very careful about how we go about achieving the targets that have been set. We can provide for diversification and streamlining farm assets, and with strategic placement of forestry, provide real benefits to stock handling and farm economics. And I think it's important as well to say that strategic planting of farmland is no longer deemed to be a failure to farm. It's accepted as being a positive step forward in maintaining a diverse business, which is resilient for the future. So to quickly look at cash flows, I think the main message here is that planting forestry can create significant benefits in the short term and the long term. This budget on the screen here is a planting site in Ayrshire, 70 hectares out of 70 hectares planted out, 90 hectares gross. And what we're showing there is a surplus of around about £65,000 at year 6. So that's money that's left over as a surplus after the site's been planted, assuming, of course, that site doesn't need extraordinary maintenance due to drought or pest. But it's typical to expect that you should be in a position of at least break even, depending on site scale and opportunity, but at least break even, for an establishment project of a reasonable scale. We have some excellent targeted grants for central Scotland. We have extremely good capital grants elsewhere in Scotland as well. These are secure and Treasury backed, and they're currently secure for grants approved up to 2025. So, forestry investment market, just a quick look at this. This is really outlining why you should consider forestry as an asset on your farm. What we've seen in forestry investment and freehold investment markets in the last 10 years has been an average 12% increase. And that's really been underpinned by the increases in timber sales that we've seen. So the graph on the screen that you see here is the conifer standing sale index in blue and the pounds per hectare for freehold investment grade forestry in brown. So the two are very much mirroring each other, and the timber value is underpinning that investment value. But what this does gives you a really good opportunity to build a good capital asset on a farm unit. So just to go to conclusions, woodland and forestry planting provides significant opportunity for diversification. Natural capital improvements benefit not only the farmer and landowner, but also provide wider societal benefits. Use of planting to streamline and simplify farm boundaries makes for easier stock management. Improving stock health and survival through shelter and removal of problem areas, which may cause fluke, for instance. Convert areas of high input into areas of high output. Just improve the economics overall. And I think, final point, woodland is no longer seen as an activity of last resort, and it can be something that can be integrated into a farming unit and provide significant future income and capital volume. So thank you for listening to that presentation. I think Virginia and I will just probably come back on the screen and answer any questions that we may have from the table.
Yes, and thank you very much indeed, David, for your valuable input today. Can you see me back again?
I can, indeed.
If anyone has any questions, we have 5 minutes for questions at the moment, and I'll answer any further questions on chat throughout the day. Please also visit myself on Scottish Forestry's e-booth for today for further discussion after the sessions. And as David said, presentations for today will be available. If for any reason anyone can't get them, please do email me at virginia.hardenscott@forestry.gov.scot. And the Peter Gascoigne video will be available all day on our e-stand, so please do visit us. So is there anybody who verbally wishes to ask a question today that we can answer right now?
No, I think I'll just I'll answer some of the questions on the session chat here. Oh, sorry, did we have somebody coming in there? No.
Nope.
So a question from Alex Wilson. Can you confirm that both the capital grant, fencing grant and annual maintenance payments are all tax-free, meaning that the costs incurred are disallowed in the profit? Yes. To be very clear, forestry planting has a very favourable position as far as taxation is concerned. There is no grant on timber, there's no income tax on timber income, and there's no income tax on the forestry grant scheme, capital payments and maintenance payments. That is different from the previous schemes, from the schemes that have gone prior to it, like of the forestry grant scheme and the Scottish forestry grant scheme. The Woodland grant scheme and the Scottish forestry grant scheme. The annual payments that were received under those schemes were subject to income tax. But under the new scheme, the forestry grant scheme that's currently running, they are not.
Okay, thank you, David, for answering that question. I think I have answered a few questions on chat already. So Georgina Weston, thank you for your question. I'll take that to colleagues in my grants and licenses at National Office Scottish Forestry, if I may, and come back to you. If you could please make sure that I have your email address, that'd be much appreciated.
There's another question here from Ian Stewart. Whilst there's great interest in woodland creation, replanting the felled woodlands can be a problem. With poor quality shelter belts that are in poor condition, the revenue can be considerably less than replanting costs, which inhibits anything being done, leaving woodland undermanaged. Yeah, this is definitely a real problem, and it is definitely a problem for farm woodland, and one that needs to be considered quite closely when designing new farm woodlands, in that they need to be accessible and they need to be well designed and as commercial as they possibly can be. There is definitely a case that high extraction costs in remote farm woodlands, when they blow down or come into poor condition, don't cover the restocking. I think it's really a case in that circumstance of getting your local friendly woodland manager to come and have a discussion with you and see what can be done. Often looking at expanding that shelter strip, perhaps 30 metres either side, means that could be enclosed within a new native woodland, and perhaps the fencing could be partially offset against new native woodland against the restocking of the shelter belt. So definitely matters to consider. We certainly, again, worthwhile visiting our expo booth today as well if you want a little bit more information on general woodland management aspects. We're available to chat in there today all day long, so please feel free to do that.
And David, thank you very much for your response to that. Can I just add to that? Ian McDonald, who I mentioned in my slides today, he had an undermanaged area which was completely windblown of Norway spruce that needed cleaned up. The costs were negative as far as he was concerned in terms of doing so, but what he did was that very thing that David suggested. He incorporated it into a wider woodland creation scheme to provide continuity for shelter when that stand was taken down, and more than covered the cost of the management operations for taking out that timber through the general grant payments for the Woodland Creation Scheme, and got the fencing partly under the Woodland Creation Forestry Grant Scheme as well. And Ian Stewart, thank you very much for your question. Also to highlight that we have under the Forestry Grant Scheme Woodland restructuring regeneration options, the restructuring grant. So you probably are aware of that, but please do come back to me if you have any questions. But absolutely, there is a key incentive here to plan your woodlands at the very start. We are seeing the result of undermanaged woodlands coming back on us at the moment. That absolutely gives us incentive when planting new woodlands, as per the video with Peter Gascoigne. Think of access at the very beginning. How are you going to manage it? It's not just about choosing the most inaccessible, undervalued part of your farm and sticking some trees in, because that won't work financially in the long term. You've got to think about how you're managing it from the very outset, and planning is key.
Yeah, absolutely. And final question at the bottom here from Martin Kennedy, and he's identifying that there is obviously a current difficulty with the tenancy situation, and how can you square that circle? I think neither Virginia or I are probably qualified to answer that question. But I was part of a webinar a week ago or so, which was discussing this exact position. And we do know that this has been looked into. The tree planting on tenanted land has been looked into very seriously by the Scottish Government. If we are to achieve the targets that the Scottish Government wishes us to achieve, then we must be able to look at tenanted land as being an option, and there must be a route to achieve that. So unfortunately, I'm not giving you an answer, but all I am saying is that it is something that is being looked at very, very seriously at the moment to try and develop a system which is equitable for both sides, and understood and allows a way forward in that aspect.
And Martin, just to echo what David is saying, there is currently a national group looking at the tenant farming issue in terms of woodland creation that's being supported by my colleagues in national office. So if you'd like to email me after this session, I can absolutely provide you with updates on that group. Perhaps you're already aware of that group.
Great.
But absolutely good.
Sorry, I think we're about time right.
I think we're done. So I believe that our time is finished. Thank you very much indeed to everyone today. Please do come and join us on our booths afterwards. And thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found it useful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.